Hello, welcome to the Glazoff Gang. I'm Louis Leinhardt, sitting in for Jamie Glazoff, and today we have a very special guest, Mark Dury, a theologian, human rights activist, pastor in Anglican Church, and an associate fellow at the Middle East Forum. And today we're going to be discussing the pamphlet that's been being spoken about in the media and other outlets concerning the slavery that is taking place within the context of Islam, and whether or not this is an Islamic worldview that is supported by the primary source materials, or if it's just a rogue set of followers of a sect of Islam that isn't orthodox, that has taken it upon themselves simply to use the religion as a pretext for slavery and the imposing of other types of draconian type of actions upon their fellow human beings. And with us, let me introduce Mark to our guest. Mark, how are you today?
It's great to be with you, Louis, on the Glazoff Gang again. I'm well down in sunny Australia.
Thank you, and really pleased to have you as our guest today. Mark, can you speak to this pamphlet that's been going around? A lot of different talk shows have spoken about it, but many of them like to dismiss it as a non-Islamic pamphlet that is not supported by Islam. What do you have to say about that?
I think all the schools of Islamic jurisprudence would agree that taking captive women in times of war is permitted in Islamic law. That's certainly been universally accepted up until modern times. And the Islamic State is following those principles and is obviously implementing them. It is universally accepted in the different schools, or it has been until recent times, because it's so well established in the example and teaching of Muhammad. In fact, just about all of those points in the pamphlet can be justified directly from the example of Muhammad's life. And there have also been many calls for this sort of practice in recent years. Just to give you an example of a source, the Sahih al-Bukhari, the Sahih Muslim, which is a collection of traditions of Muhammad, very respected, has a chapter in Book 6 which has the heading, "It's permissible to have sexual intercourse with a captive woman after she's purified. In case she has a husband, her marriage is not abrogated after she becomes a captive." So that's a chapter heading taken straight out of one of Islam's most revered canonical texts.
Is this a similar thing that has been taking place with Boko Haram, with the taking of the young ladies there?
Absolutely. They are following the same principle, and they also claimed quite explicitly that they were selling the girls in accordance with the example and the teaching of Muhammad. There have been many others that have spoken up for these principles. A Saudi cleric just over 10 years ago in a telethon said it was acceptable to take Jewish women and take them as slaves. Their women are yours to take legitimately. Why don't you enslave them? Why don't you pillage them? Omar Bakri Muhammad, the leader of a group used to be called Al-Muhajirun in the UK, he also said that when the Islamic State is established, no non-Muslim will have any sanctity for life, and in such circumstances a Muslim can go into the lands of war, that is the non-Muslim area, and take people, and they can take women to keep as slaves as well. So this is not a strange and new teaching. It's part of the history of mainstream Islamic jurisprudence, and it's been advocated by radical supporters of the Islamic revival in quite a number of years.
Yeah, we see, Mark, in the Quran, in chapter 4, verse 24, it says that all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hand possesses. So this seems to be right in line with the teachings of the Quran. So what kind of justification is there for those who deny that this is an Islamic teaching?
They have absolutely no justification based on the Quran or the example of Muhammad. They justify it based on humanitarian values, I think. So there would be some who would reinterpret Islam based on a more modern understanding of human rights and the dignity of human beings, and they might come to such an argument or come to such a conclusion. But anyone who's really following the Quran carefully or the example of Muhammad would understand that it's permissible. And Muhammad himself took a number of slaves captive and had sex with them. There were two Jewish women, Safiya and Rayhana, who he took captive after killing their husbands. So this is straight out of the textbook, if you like. It's straight out of the core Islamic sources.
Yeah, it's very interesting that it says all married women. So this would be adultery or a violation of what Muhammad claimed to have stood for, which is the Ten Commandments. Isn't that so?
That is true. I think just about every one of the Ten Commandments in the Quran, there are conditions where it's permissible to break them. And this is one here. So it's having sex with a married woman is illegal in Islam, and the punishment for it is death by stoning. In Islam, that's the case, that penalty. However, if you take a woman captive in war, Islamic law declares that she's automatically divorced by being taken captive. So having sex with her is not adultery. So that's they've thought it out very carefully, and to protect the purity and honor of the man, that he hasn't committed a sin by committing adultery. So they've got all bases covered, you might say.
Yeah, you mentioned the hadiths, and there is a reference in Volume 3, Book 34, number 432, and there it's speaking about the practice of coitus interruptus. And the Muslim men apparently were worried that they would impregnate these women and would not get a proper price for them when they sold them. And they went to Muhammad about this, and he did not object to this practice. Can you speak about that?
Yes, that's one of the points in the pamphlet. Is it permissible to have sex? Al-azal is the practice, what it's called. Is it permissible to refrain from ejaculating on the woman's sexual part? So that's one of the questions. And the answer is a man is allowed to refrain, or he can refrain or not refrain. This is based on a question that was asked of Muhammad. And the hadith, the tradition of Muhammad, was recounted as such. It's, Abu Sa'id said, we went out with the apostle of Allah, that's Muhammad, on an expedition, and we took some Arab women captive, and we desired the women because we were suffering from the absence of our wives, and we wanted ransom as well. So should they have sex with the women? Should they ransom the women? And he said we were intending to have sex, but practice coitus interruptus so as not to make them pregnant, because we wanted to ransom them. And if they became pregnant, then, they'd be our children and whatever. And we asked Muhammad, can we withdraw the penis? And he said, it doesn't matter. You can do it or not do it, because any soul that's going to be born is going to be born anyway, whether you do it or not. So that's why in the pamphlet, because of that information from Muhammad, the pamphlet addresses this issue explicitly and says you can do it or not do it. It's totally up to you. And that's they very much have in mind what Muhammad taught in that respect.
It's very interesting. Now, so how would we then address someone like Arsalan Ittikar, who says this, and he's an American international human rights lawyer and a global media commentator and author, and he said this, quote, no Islamic scholar, and this is in reference to the pamphlet, no Islamic scholar in their right mind would ever endorse. And how would we address somebody with that kind of a background who objects to this being an Islamic teaching? What would be a proper approach in dialoguing with somebody who is respected in the media, respected in the Muslim community, and many would take his word as authoritative?
I think you'd want to point out the many scholars that have said exactly that. For example, in the edition of the Sahih Muslim, the collection of hadiths according to Muslim, Abdul Hamid Siddiqui, who's a fellow of the Islamic Research Academy of Karachi and the translator of the text, he wrote, this expression, those whom your right hands possess, that is female slaves, denotes slave girls, women taken in holy war. When women are taken captive, their previous marriages are annulled, and so on. So he's an example of a scholar. There'd be many scholars, both modern and every medieval scholar, every classical scholar, the founders of the schools of jurisprudence, they would have all permitted this because Muhammad did it. So he is either ignorant, or he's lying, or he or he's on cloud cuckoo land, really, because what he said is just completely false.
Well, the concept of taqiyya in Islam, it wouldn't be beyond the Muslim even a respected Muslim scholar, to use deception in the propagation of his worldview, would it?
It's certainly permissible in Islam to lie in order to protect the Muslim community, particularly, and that particular practice applies when Muslims are in a minority position under the control and oversight of non-Muslims, as happens in the West. So it is permissible in that context to mislead. I think in practice it's hard to work out sometimes whether people are lying or whether they are indulging in wishful thinking or ignorance, but it's certainly one of the possibilities in that case that should be considered.
Now, Mark, is there an age limit in which the Muslim men take these women as sex slaves? Do they have any respect for the dignity of children, or are there no bounds by which they are restricted?
Well, I think many Muslim men have respect for women and for children. The problem is that Muhammad married his wife Aisha when she was 6 and consummated the marriage when she was 9 lunar years old. And one of the effects of that is that marriage or sex with a young girl is permissible in Islam. And in fact, there's a verse in the Quran that says that if a woman has not yet had her first period and she's divorced, it gives the time frame that's required before she can remarry. So there are conditions in the Quran about the remarriage of a girl who's prepubescent. So this is kind of hardwired really into the holy text of Islam, and it's hardwired in the example of Muhammad. And you'll find that what we would call underage marriages are widespread. And so it's not at all surprising that the Islamic State said that there's no age limit for having sex with captive girls if she's fit for it, whatever that means. Presumably the man decides whether she's fit or not. And they even suggest you can play sexually with her if you can't penetrate her, no matter how young she is. So that sort of guideline is not inconsistent with Islamic holy texts as well. It seems appalling and unbelievable to us in the West that that's the case, but these sorts of perspectives are in fact well justified. They can be justified from Islam's canon.
Right. The pamphlet also seems to address the issue of beating the captives. Are men justified in beating women within this context of Islamic slavery?
According to the Quran, a man can beat his wife, and that's a permissible way of disciplining her. There are, however, some conditions upon it. He shouldn't beat for his own pleasure. He shouldn't beat, in a cruel way, but rather to discipline her appropriately. The International Fiqh Academy, which is a jurisprudence academy set up by the international states, Islamic states around the world, it affirmed the right of a husband to discipline his wife. They said that it's not spouse abuse to beat your wife for acceptable Islamic reasons. This is a mainstream view in Islam, and certainly the treatment of captive girls would be the same. A man can use force against a young girl who's refusing to have sex with him in order to compel her to do it. That's very easy to justify from Islamic sources.
Now, Mark, in the few minutes that we have left, to conclude this subject before we move on to the issue of terrorism, so then you would affirm as a scholar in comparative religion that this pamphlet that is being passed around through ISIS is in fact an Islamic worldview?
Yes, I think the points they raise are reasonable and rational ones based on what is contained within Islamic teaching. And since they've decided to take female slaves, it's important for them as Muslims to regulate it according to Islamic law. So it's completely understandable they would put out such a pamphlet in order to prevent people from acting wrongly and in violation of Islam's commands. They need to care for the consciences and the salvation, if you like, of their soldiers. So they've put that out in good conscience in order to protect their men from doing the wrong thing. They have a duty to inform the men about these religious requirements.
Thank you. Now, Mark, can you speak to the recent events that took place concerning the terrorist acts that were shown on television here in America and I'm sure worldwide concerning the man that took hostages in Australia and was taken down by the Australian authorities?
Well, this is just in this last week. An immigrant to Australia, originally an asylum seeker from Iran, who's caused no end of trouble over the last few decades, decided to, I suppose, in a way, end his life and to put others at risk by enacting a siege in a cafe just outside the New South Wales Parliament building. And the outcome of that, an event which has horrified the nation, is that two people have been shot and perhaps others wounded. The details of who's been hurt are not clear yet. And the man himself was killed by the security forces when they came they heard gunshots in the middle of the night, and that triggered for them the need to go in and try and rescue the people. So they did that, and the outcome was that this perpetrator, Hojat al-Islam Mohammed Hassan Manteki, also known as Man Harun Monis, he was killed.
Now, a lot of people are calling him a lone attacker, but it seems to me that when we look at all these lone wolf attackers, they make quite a large group. So is this something to be worried about, and how do we deal with these concepts of lone wolf jihadist or terrorist attack?
The idea of lone wolf derives from the Western idea that these are manifestations of extremism or bizarre kind of marginal behavior. So that implies a renegade, a person who's not tied into the mainstream, and that makes them inherently unpredictable and strange and weird. In fact, this phenomenon of individual Muslims deciding to wage a private jihad is very widespread. We've seen it in I think they call them green on blue attacks in Afghanistan, in a number of attacks in the UK and in the US. It's based on an Islamic doctrine that jihad, when Muslim areas are occupied or under attack, jihad is an individual obligation upon Muslims, so no command is necessary. Particularly, they have an obligation to fight against infidels, and the life of non-Muslims is not protected. In this particular case, the attacker was also acting out of solidarity with the Islamic State. He'd, interestingly, I think, converted or announced his Shia background and became a Sunni Muslim and declared that he was an agent of the Islamic State. So he was fighting the jihad of the Islamic State. You know, it's really interesting, Lewis, because almost exactly 100 years ago, on the 1st of January 1915, two Muslims in Broken Hill in outback New South Wales took it upon themselves to bring the Ottomans' jihad to Australia, and they mounted themselves up on a hillside, and they shot on 1,200 picnickers who were going past them in ore trucks, and killed several of them. And they left a message to say that they wrote, "We must kill you and give our lives for our faith." And they were doing this in obedience to the command of the Ottoman Sultan for Muslims all over the world to rise up and wage jihad. And this is exactly the same theological basis that this man has used in his attack here in Sydney today, almost 100 years later.
Wow, very insightful. Dr. Mark Drury, thank you very much for joining us on the Glasoff Gang. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It's been a pleasure having you. And if anybody would like to access any of the information that you have available for our education, can you give a quick reference to any sites or books that you might give us access to?
My site, markdurie.com, markdurie.com, has many talks, lectures, and also a link to my blog, which has more than 100 articles on Islamic radicalism.
Very well. Thank you very much, and we hope to have you back again. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure, Lewis.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us on the Glasoff Gang, and we hope to see you again next time. Good night.